we are. I'm Tom Osman, and this is Whatever Comes Next, the podcast where I explore the world of underground and independent music making. And on today's episode, I am joined by Etienne Flinn, who, alongside Soren Mourne, is the core of Canadian gothic-doom band Tribunal, who last month put out their second album, In Penitence and Ruin, on 20 Buck Spin. And I have been known to be partial to a bit of gothic doom. What particularly grabbed me about Tribunal in the latest record is the way that they blend together the more sort of traditional guitar-based doom rock metal with the more kind of orchestral classical component that they have thanks to Soren's cello playing, as well as some other additional instrumentation that adds to that element. But it's a cool contrast that they have in terms of the instrumentation and their sound, as well as also the contrast between the vocals of Soren and the vocals of Etienne, which is another interesting dimension to the band. And so that is the nature of this discussion. The band, Etienne's history in music, songwriting, instrumentation, performing on stage, touring, shows, booking shows, and such things. I am going to play a track from the album. As usual, I haven't decided which one, at the end of the episode with a little clip. In just a moment, you can follow Tribunal to keep up to date with what they've got going on with shows on Instagram and Facebook. You can go to 20 Buck Spin if you'd like to pick up a copy of the album. It's available on, I think Etienne said 5 different vinyl editions. There's one, I think, which is a special edition through Decibel magazine. But I will put all links in the description. You can follow me on all social media at Tom Osman Sounds. You can go to my website, tomosmansounds.com, to see what I'm doing musically. And I think that is it. So, without further ado, Etienne Flinn of Tribunal, take it away.
Dream of drowning in tides of guilt. The waves I sink beneath grow red with blood you spilled. Watch out for the shore.
So, talking about the band then, so you've just put out your second album, In Penitence and Ruin, on 20 Buck Spin. Super cool record. I've really been enjoying listening to it. I like the combination you have of the crushing doom metal with the more kind of like classical elements of the cello, and obviously the combination of your vocals with the vocals of Soren as well, which I think contrast to it. And she's got an amazing voice too, so it really adds these kind of unusual in a way, I would say, or like kind of distinctive features of your music. Yeah, so I'm pleased to get the chance to talk to you about the record and about your music in general.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I'm really excited to finally have the second album out. We've been working hard on it for a long time, and it's been a real pleasure, yeah, to have people finally get to hear it and appreciate the little details. And I'm very excited to very soon get to start playing live locally and perform these new songs for fans. But yeah, it's an exciting time. You put a lot of work into it. A lot of, as you probably noticed, was very layered, textured, complex music that requires a lot of painstaking work behind the scenes to bring it together. And so finally having to sort of reap the fruits of that and have it out there for people to listen to is really exciting.
And so with this being your second album, you obviously had the experience of making your debut, the Weight of Remembrance. So how did the process of making this album compare to the first one?
It was a refinement in a lot of ways. You know, you learn a lot of stuff making an album. We knew almost nothing about making an album when we made our first one. So it was very much sort of learn as you go. This one was maybe a little more professional. We had a bit of a better vocal setup, still largely DIY. We recorded drums in a studio, but aside from that, everything was recorded at home. But for example, this time we had a real cello that we live mic'd. Soren has a wonderful like physical acoustic, what you would think of as being a normal cello, that we don't actually use very often because in the context of playing live and jamming, it makes much more sense to have the electric cello she has.
Yeah.
But the sound, in my opinion, of the cello on the second album is leaps ahead of what it was on the first, because the first was all recorded input jack pickup on the electric cello, which is nice, but not the same. So yeah, I'm very like little details like that. I think we spent more time on the vocals. We both became, frankly, better vocalists in the process of making the first album and touring it and writing new music. I think we both became much better at that part of our musicianship. So I think that's been a really cool development. Like I think there's things that I can do vocally on this record that I couldn't do on the first album, or I didn't do. There's things Soren does that she couldn't do. I remember on our first album, we down-tuned the song Creeping Moss just a half step when we recorded it, partially because Soren was struggling to hit one of the high notes in the chorus. And it's funny now because we don't down-tune it to play it live. It's just easy. It's not even like a strain for her at this point. She hits much higher stuff on the second album. But it's just, when you work at this stuff and you go on tour doing it every night, you just get better. And it's exciting to be able to bring that to the table on our second album. So,
and how big a component has playing live been for the band?
I would say it's pretty huge for us. Like we love hitting the stage. We love being able to bring our music to audiences. It's very much like it's a style of music that maybe doesn't necessarily lend itself to immediate live performance. I think sometimes people think of it as very much like crying in your room by yourself kind of music, but it is fun to have that collective shared experience. And a lot of the bands that we look up to are bands that don't necessarily tour here very regularly. And yeah, we love our live performances. I love being able to connect with an audience in a room. We work very hard at performing what is fairly complex, layered music with no backing tracks or like recorded elements. So that's something that brings another level of complexity that I think influences our writing process back and forth, where we're not committed to performing things exactly the way they sound on record, but I do want to deliver the sense of the song to people. Like I don't want people ever walking away thinking like, oh, that part of the song wasn't there live and I missed that. You know? So that's something we think about when we're composing. In some ways, it keeps you a little bit grounded. To be like, okay, how can we play this live? How would we play this live? But it's also be like a fun problem-solving problem to be like, how do you use the tools you have to deliver that experience both on record and on stage?
Yeah, exactly. So even if you're not creating it in exactly the same way, you can still deliver the same kind of impact and the same kind of impression that you're trying to get through the music. I was actually wondering about the way that you configure this configure it on stage. And I was watching a video of you guys playing from 2021, and I saw that Soren's got the electric cello on a stand, and then she's got the bass there, and she'll go back and forth between the two. So is there anything else that's kind of stands out in terms of the logistics that you've got to manage when you're playing stuff live?
That's the big pivot point for us, and working around it in different ways, because ultimately that is the big that's the big thing, I would say, like behind the curtain, is that Soren obviously can't play bass and cello at the same time. So that's the thing that you kind of have to do a little bit of musician magic to make happen. And we've got a couple different tricks we can use for that. Sometimes it's just straight, like she doesn't play bass for a section and you don't miss it. I have a Boss OC5 octave pedal that's actually polyphonic. So what that means in English is that it can take, if I play a chord on my guitar, it can isolate the lowest note of that chord and then drop that note an octave and send that out through a separate output. So what that sounds like in practice when everything's working is that can simulate the sound of a bass player locked in with what I'm playing on rhythm guitar. So I use that sometimes to simulate bass parts when she's playing cello. And then, of course, we have a keyboardist, which unlocks a whole host of options there, whether that be sometimes the keys take over a cello part and play like a synthesized string melody. And other times the keys just get super low and fill out that low end on live so that you don't miss the bass sound as much. So that's kind of the main thing we try to work with, is figuring out how to fill in the cello bass dynamic so that you don't miss either instrument when she can't play it.
Yeah. And I was wondering as well about the lineup, because when I look at the credits for the first album, I think you don't have everyone that you've got on the latest record. But then when I was looking at you on stage, I was thinking, from this video I watched from 2021, it looked like the same lineup as what you have now. So is that right? Or how have things evolved over the past few years?
So yeah, it's been a slow evolution, but essentially the narrative was that we formed the band with the two of us, but we very quickly pulled together a lineup of different musicians. A drummer named Lena and a guitarist, Maria, who sort of jammed through the first record with us. And then when the pandemic hit, that lineup ended up splintering amicably, and it went back to just being Soren and I working on the record. At that point, it was COVID. You couldn't play live anyways, so we figured we'd prioritize getting the album done. So on the first album, I recorded all the guitar parts, and we hired a session drummer who at the time we didn't know at all, Julia, to track the album with us. That was, I think, like the second day I met her, was going into the studio to record drums on that record. But of course, that went really well. We got on really well with her. She started playing with us live and then has become our full-time drummer. And then same thing with the rest of the lineup. Dallas on keys and Jessica Yang on guitar, they didn't play on the album, but fairly quickly, as the world started to open up, we were keen to be ready for live performances. They were both people I knew through the scene. And so we started jamming together. At that 2021 video, that would be, at that point, the band would have been officially Soren and I, with the other three as live members. But, we just jammed together for a long time, and it was a very slow, growth of the relationship over time to become a full band together. And I remember having a conversation about, we've been playing together for a couple of years, like, hey, do you guys want to be official members of the band? And one of the questions multiple of them asked were just like, okay, what'll change if that happens? And you're like, I don't know, like, it's one of those things. Who officially is or isn't in a band is something that, from an external perspective, and as a fan to myself, matters a lot. Like, the narratively matters a lot, but the reality is, on a practical level, it's just, to a certain extent, a band is just a construct, and it doesn't actually necessarily have to change anything. So, we've been evolving in a direction where, they participated more in the creation of this album. They had a fair amount of input on their, individual instrument parts, and we jammed through the structures with them. But this second record is still, all the songs are written by Soren and myself, and very much like the concept is something that came up between the two of us. So, but it's still an evolving relationship, and we'll see what happens in the future.
And on that topic of the concept, so is it right to call the record a concept album, or is it more about the sort of the running themes of penitence and punishment?
I would call it a concept album. It's sort of it's not necessarily a strict narrative, but I think I envision all of the songs as being about the same character or set of characters sketched very broadly. You sort of have the penitent, as it were, is the main character, and it's someone who has done something very wrong and very harmful, and the album, each individual song, sort of explores that from different directions. Whether that's Incarnadine, for example, the opener is very much looks at it from the perspective of relationships with the people you love, and there's somebody who the penitent is very close to. Maybe it's romantic relationship, family, friendship, but that sense of how do you relate to somebody who's done something horrible? How do you are you do you have that guilt by association for still loving them or still wanting to support them or be there for them? Or, and from the other side, does the penitent feel guilt for dragging down the people they care about, versus, not wanting to let go and be alone? So it's very much intended to be open-ended. I'm speaking vaguely, there's no underlying certainty under it. I think it's very much intended to be something that the audience can interpret for themselves exactly what happened. To me, I think music is very, very good at delivering emotion, at delivering feeling, but it's not good at all about delivering facts or narratives or like this happened, then this happened, then this happened. So I think the concept is sketched very broadly, and everything's very much intended to be open to interpretation, both in terms of what specifically happened and what it means and what the audience should take away from it. But it is meant to be a bit of food for thought in the context of, justice and retribution and right and wrong, and living in a world where I think we all cause harm and we all hurt people, and we all have a worst day of our lives, and we all have a worst thing we've ever done. And how do we go on and live with ourselves and live with each other? Yeah. So it is, I would say it's a concept album in that sense.
And in terms of, like you gave quite a detailed description there of the concept. How much does that come from you? How much does that come from Soren when you're writing the lyrics? How much are you doing it together versus having your separate distinct parts?
That is actually quite a fascinating story, because when we wrote the first album, first off, each of us writes about half the songs on each record, and what we usually do is we tend to write separately and then arrange together, but we usually write the lyrics for our own songs separately, and then we edit them together sometimes. But on this album, the first album was just a total grab bag of songs. They're threaded together by being written in the same time in the same place, but they are ultimately don't have any specific connection to each other. We wanted this one to be a concept album, but we first sketched it out as, let's write an album just about justice, about morality, about, right and wrong, very broadly sketched. And then we both started writing music. And I sort of looked at some of the songs I was writing, and I had written at that point, I'd written Between the Sea and Stars, I'd written Angel of Mercy, and I was thinking, okay, I was starting to see, maybe a connection between these pieces and how they might be brought together. And I remember sort of talking to Soren about it and saying, okay, like there's a bit of I'm starting to see maybe like a bit of a connection here. Maybe we should do something more specific. And I remember her having like the same conversation with me around the same time of saying, like, I'm writing some stuff that sort of is connecting a bit more. Do we maybe want to have a specific concept? And literally, I think we both independently came up with the same concept for the album in the songs we've been writing separately. Because I think, we both have a mutual strong interest in this sort of justice and systems of justice. And we've been having a lot of conversations at the time about that sort of subject matter. So it very naturally emerged organically from a broader concept. And I really came from both of us. So that was really cool. And that was very much that sense of like, okay, we really should do this because, yeah.
Yeah, it's what you're both coming up with. I mean, I guess it makes sense if the two of you are having a lot of these discussions, then you're both going to have a similar kind of pool of thoughts and ideas to draw from when it comes to where you're going to take the music.
Yeah, and ultimately the concept is both specific, but it's also very open-ended. And frankly, I think even between Soren and myself, I think sometimes we mean slightly different things by it, but that's part of that's part of the value of it. I think it's more about asking important questions than it is giving important answers.
Yeah, and I think that's a lot of the time. I think that's the most satisfying, or that's one of the most satisfying things in music, is to be given something that's open to a lot of different interpretations, and it's up to you to decide what you're going to do with it.
Yeah, and that's was very much our intention here. So we hope listeners just think of it and take something away from it. Yeah,
and thinking about the classical aspect of the music, and it's not just Soren's cello playing, but I think in the keys, sometimes, maybe not all the time, but the keys are programmed in a way that it sounds to me like a harpsichord, so it has that kind of classical sound to it. And I grew up in a household where my parents were always playing classical music, but I've never been good at actually really identifying, like different eras and different styles. But would it be right to characterize the classical component as being like Baroque?
Oh, that is a Soren question. That is not a Etienne question at all. You're correct that we have a harpsichord. That is a important influence there. But It's an interesting dynamic in the band because Soren, as you might imagine, is classically trained. She's been playing cello since she
Yeah.
was a young child. That is not an instrument one picks up trivially or casually. Wherein I actually can't read music. I am extremely, I know like one or two scales. That's about it. And I write very much by intuition. I write very much by ear. And I think a lot of our sound and our style comes from that blending of influences where you sort of, maybe I'd like to think I ground some of Soren's compositional ideas or whatnot, or she brings some of the more of the richness and the complexity, because you do have the two very different sounding influences from two very different approaches to writing. But all that to say, I have absolutely no idea if this is Baroque or not.
That's all good. Yeah, thinking about the you're playing then. So what is your background? So I expected, like you say, you don't just casually pick up a cello. So I expected that she would have had training with that. Like, tell me your background in terms of playing music and playing guitar.
My background, I mean, I've loved music for a long time. I think, frankly, like a lot of musicians my age, I remember getting quite into Guitar Hero and Rock Band as a kid, as a teenager. And your dad's like, "Oh, you're always playing that damn video game. You should learn to play a real instrument." And I'm like, "Sure." So he got me a guitar and guitar lessons. And at the time, like when I first came up playing guitar, I was very much was much more into sort of punk and alternative rock and pop punk and that sort of thing. And that's very much like what my friends of the time who I was jamming with were into. And so I very much grew up on that sort of sloppier style of guitar playing, kind of a bit aggressive, a bit of that, a lot of garage rock adjacent bands, like the White Stripes and the Strokes kind of stuff, where it's very much you're stylistically a bit rubbish at your instrument. Um, and then, yeah, as I got a bit older, I got really into metal. Both when I was very young, I got into metal from my older sister, who brought home a bunch of like symphonic metal and power metal from some of her friends in high school. You're talking like Nightwish, Camelot, Sonata Arctica. With In Temptation at the time, which I think is maybe one of the bands that would be the closest to a direct influence on Tribunal sound. And then I got out of it for a while and circled back around via a lot of like Warped Tour metalcore type stuff. So that's maybe, and that's how I got into what I guess you'd call heavier music. Like Asking Alexandria's Reckless and Relentless was the first album that I listened to and said like, oh, I would want to do harsh vocals, like screaming and growling is cool. And then from there, I circled back into what I'll affectionately call real metal over time. Got really into Amorphous and that, and started to get more into like death, doom, and doom metal through My Dying Bride, Draconian, and then I honestly for a long time thought playing metal, like being in a metal band, was off limits to me for simply not being very good at my instrument. You think about power metal bands, death metal bands, thrash metal bands. These guys are like shredding, playing fast. You're like, I cannot do that. But it wasn't until I met Soren that she sort of like pushed me a bit and said like, we could start a band together. You like metal, you could play doom metal. And I didn't necessarily have a lot of confidence in my ability to do that, but we started jamming together and it worked pretty well. And here we are.
So that's interesting. So she was into the idea specifically of having a doom metal project, and she was going to involve her cello in that.
Yeah. So we had both moved to Vancouver for school around the same time. And I think we were the only people in our program who were into metal. And we were both at that point like slightly washed up musicians who'd kind of, you do the approach to a project where you pour your heart and your soul into it. You put a lot of work and nothing of any impact comes out of it. You do that a couple times. It's pretty draining. But I think she was keen to jam together. We were keen to play together. And I think doom metal sort of naturally came out of just the intersection of our influences. Like we both have relatively different tastes. Even in doom metal, there aren't a lot of bands that we both like. But, that was a place that both our skills and our interests overlapped. And so it was the obvious place to write in that context. In terms of the cello, that was something initially we knew, I think, from the beginning that could be a cool element, But our early live shows had no cello in them. We saw it very much as being not a feasible instrument to deploy live,
Mm.
especially if she was also playing bass. And so we originally were writing much more from the perspective of just like a two guitar, bass, drums band, with cello maybe being something we overdubbed in the studio.
Right. Okay.
Originally, actually, it's funny enough, we weren't even looking at doing vocals ourselves. Originally we were planning on hiring a separate vocalist, like maybe like a mixed vocalist who could do cleans and harshes. And it was only when we started recording demos and we were just like, let's throw some vocals on here, just to sort of track out our ideas, that I was like, wow, Soren, you have a really good voice. And, we could just do this ourselves. And so and I think the band very naturally evolved out of our mutual interests and our mutual abilities from there. And sort of it became more obvious to bring the cello in over time as it well suited the material that we were writing. And it was the sort of thing that seemed hard, almost unfeasible. And you don't want it to come across as a gimmick, right? Like I'm not going to name names, but I've seen bands like pull out some contraption on stage that clearly is driving the sound tech insane, and then they play like 4 notes in one song on it, and you're like, oh, come on, guys. See, if we were going to do it, you wanted to have it integrated enough as an instrument that you didn't feel like you're wasting the sound tech's time setting it up. But it was one of those things that kind of as soon as we brought it in, which was quite late in the sessions for Weight of Remembrance, it was like, okay, actually, this is really cool. This is really exciting. This is worth the effort. But that's a big difference between the first and second albums. Is the first album very much was a relatively last minute, okay, we are going to be a band where the cello is actually a central instrument. Let's, colloquially speaking, let's just shove some cello in there where it'll fit. Like a couple of the songs do have stuff that very much they were done and we put cello in. Whereas the new record, every song was written and arranged with the intention of cello from the beginning. And that's one of the things I really love about the new record.
Yeah, to me, listening to it definitely sounds like an integrated element. It doesn't sound like you wrote the music and then went, right, let's find somewhere to put the cello. In terms of your guitar playing, so you mentioned that you had a song, I think from the first album, that you were dropping slightly so that Soren could sing lower. Do you tend to have your guitar in the same tuning? What tuning do you play in?
So the first album we did in drop D, except that Soren plays in D standard because she is an adult. Whereas on this record, I like to keep things simple, with the cello and the bass and, the pedals and that. It's a complicated enough rig. We are not a band that tour with guitar techs. We usually just tour with the 5 of us. So I was keen to play a bit lower on this record, but I wanted to do that in a way that we could continue to play all the old stuff without having to swap guitars or tuning. So you can probably see on the wall behind me there, that's actually my stage guitar. That's now we've just upped to a 7 strings. So that's a 7 string in drop A. So with a little bit of alteration, you can play everything on the first album on it. You can play everything on the new record on it. And then once again, Soren's now on a 5-string bass tuned to A standard because she is still an adult.
So I've never had any experience of playing 7-string guitars. So I guess usually with the 7-string guitar, the low string is a B. So if you've got that tuned down to an A, does that mean that the E string is also tuned down to D, or you've got that at E?
No, you can do that, but this is just essentially think of it like a standard 6-string, literally in standard tuning, just with a low A dropped on it. So that low A gives you that same like bar chord tabl relate. I realized I did not intend to flip you off there. That was me simulating what it looks like to do a bar chord with one finger. You have it's essentially the same thing that you'd have in drop D, but just. But then it's great because you can do like acoustic cowboy chords on the top 6 strings if you want to, and then you have that low A, which frankly gets you as low as you need to be.
And also like from what you were saying before about using the octave pedal to substitute for bass as well, it gives you more that you can do in the lower ranges from that point of view too.
Frankly, it almost starts to introduce problems because the pedal doesn't know what to do with the lowest notes coming off that bottom string. I do not think it was designed necessarily to deal with this. Like it's annoying because I think it has a separate bass mode that can handle those low notes, but then the bass mode starts to get confused by the higher notes. So it's one
Okay.
of the many annoying complexities of delivering this sort of thing live. But it's fun. The challenges are fun. You know, if it was easy, it wouldn't be impressive.
Yeah. No, indeed. Like often, I think sort of like figuring things out in that way, you can end up kind of you can come up with interesting solutions that you wouldn't
Yeah,
have kind of like you wouldn't have done unless you had to do it.
no, for sure.
And so you mentioned that initially when you and Soren were jamming together, that you were thinking about having a separate singer. So how did you fix on the style that you were going to be singing in? What did you draw from as inspiration for that?
I was always really keen on having a mix of clean and harsh vocals. That's just most of my favorite bands, most of my favorite vocalists, one way or another, do that. Like again, I mentioned Amorphous; they're one of my favorite bands. They have a one of the most incredible mixed vocalists in the world, I think, Tommy Utzon right now. You have like obviously like a clearer influences like My Dying Bride or Draconian or Paradise Lost. I guess more
Mm.
modern Paradise Lost in particular has very much the clear switch between Nick Holmes like harsh vocals and cleans. So that's something I was very keen on. Because that's I love like extreme vocals, like I love, screaming, growling, whatever you want to call it. But I also love, I love a clean melody. And so that was always the vision from the beginning, was having a mixture of vocal styles.
Mm.
And like I said, we had initially sort of been wondering, like, oh, should we like hire a vocalist? When we started to do demos, again, Soren's voice was really good. I used to sing in bands back in the day, but I'd never really done much for harsh vocals. And frankly, I was really bad at it, both in the sense of not sounding very good, but also in the sense of having a deeply unhealthy technique that was not sustainable.
Mm.
But that was really one of those moments where I was like listening to Soren's voice, and I was like, I have to step it up. I want to step it up because I want a mix of clean and harsh vocals. That's how we want to do the band. I'll time to work on this a lot. And there's an internal recording of our first show ever, and we open with Initiation, and my voice sounds so good for the first half of the first verse, and then I clearly just blow my voice out, and I'm just like whispering into the mic for the rest of the show, just like. But ultimately, like you learn, you
Yeah.
don't. You're like, okay, we're not going to do that again. And particularly going on tour, I find has been so educational. Like you really have to learn. You have to keep yourself healthy. You have to get better technique. And I've really gotten to a place where I can do like 5 to 10 nights in a row on tour and come home and be like, I feel like my voice is stronger than ever.
Mm.
But that's taken a lot of time and practice.
And how much was this trial and error versus you actually learning some techniques in terms of maintaining it?
Definitely a mix. Like I went online a lot, went on YouTube, found tutorials and whatnot. Looked at like recorded video lessons. But at the same time, ultimately, at least for myself, maybe the most important part of it was sort of listening to my body and listening to my own voice and
Mm.
saying, like, this hurts. That's not good. This
Yeah.
doesn't hurt. That's better. One of the big checks is like, if I'm, screaming and growling for a whole practice and then I'm on the car ride home, can I still sing? And if I can still sing and I haven't lost, like I used to, like the high end of my vocal range would just disappear as soon as I started screaming. And it's
Mm.
like, in retrospect, I look back and I'm like, oh, that's a red flag. That it's not good what you're doing if that's happening.
Yeah.
So that's one of the checks. Is like listen to your body. But I don't know. I'm also not an expert. Like I know this. So yeah, I don't know if anybody's listening to this and they're like, "Ooh, I'm taking notes." Don't take notes from me. I don't know what I'm doing, but it's working for me so far. Um,
Yeah, I had some singing lessons years ago from a great classical singing instructor. Shout out Alexander Massey, if by any random chance he ends up seeing this video. But he taught me some, like he was genuinely like he was a classical musician, singing instructor. I was never doing classical music, but I ended up having lessons from him, and he taught me techniques like to the point of what you're saying about listening to your body. A lot of the techniques he taught me are about relaxation and about like ways in which you how you project and feeling the breath. And like, so now having had that, you know, like if I sing, I can feel tightness that immediately tells me, no, you're not doing this properly. I mean, the thing is, I'm not consistent. I'm not disciplined with singing. So I've lost like various elements that I had. But if I do sing, I can tell if it's going well or if it's going badly. And also when I listen to other people singing, a lot of the time, I can kind of hear, I have a better sense of if they're messing their vocal cords up basically, or if they're actually doing something in a way that's not going to harm them in the long term.
Yeah, and definitely that having that feel in it, and yeah, listening to your body, and yeah, I think I definitely feel like I've come a long way on that. I mean, it was interesting going back to the beginning of our bands and doing vocals, because it's very funny sometimes when things that are easy for you are hard for other people, and vice versa. Because like I said, like when we started, I Soren was immediately a very good vocalist. She hadn't sung in a metal band before, but I think she did choir or something
Mm.
similar. Whereas, you know, I was very new to screaming, but one of the big obstacles for us early on was that she was completely new to singing and playing at the same time. And so that was sort of mixing the vocals with the bass playing was something that she, you know, had to learn how to do and has become very good at over time. Whereas I'm like, I literally don't know what I'm doing with my voice, but I'm very good at, you know, singing and playing guitar at the same time. So you all have your own skills you need to workshop to get where you need to be.
Yeah. And you mentioned before shows and touring, and I was wondering, like from a practical point of view, how actively involved are you and Soren with booking shows versus having a booking agent or someone else to help with that?
So honestly, we've done some DIY touring back in the day. I guess not that long ago, where we booked more stuff ourselves. Honestly, that is painful and I hate it. Right
And
now,
how did you go, just to like go into that a little bit, how did you go about doing that? Was it through other bands? Was it through venues?
it's a mix. Sometimes it's through bands, sometimes it's directly through venues, sometimes it's through, you know, promoters. Oftentimes it's just asking around, networking, you know. For example, you know, if a band wants to hit up Vancouver, you know, I have a very good relationship with multiple promoters in town. You know, I have a good relationship with multiple venues in town. I would know who to talk to. You know, you want to hit another city, you have no idea. But hopefully you can at least connect with somebody like me who can tell you who to talk to. And
Yeah.
then one of those people wants to work with you. But it's a lot of juggling. It's particularly if you don't just want to book a show, but you want to book a tour. There's a bunch of moving parts, and this venue is available that day, and that venue is not available that day. And, you know, maybe one show falls through. That's like a cascading, you know, house of cards that knocks your whole line of dates down. You got to reschedule everything. And sometimes, especially like if you can't get any like bites on local promoters want to work with you, maybe you do have to go to the venues directly yourselves, and then that's even more work. And so it's hard. And I'm very grateful right now that we have a North American booking agent, Kevin Blummeyer with Atomic Music Group, who's working with us. And that's honestly, it's really nice to just be able to be like, yeah, just this is what we're looking to do. Can you make it happen? So that's honestly something I'm very grateful for. Like we're not like a big band at this point. We're not like making big cash or whatever, but one of the nicest luxuries of being a bit established is having relationships like with the record label, 20 Bucks Spin, or their
Mm.
associated PR people. Just having some of those, like even like, you know, David with Earsplit, who is setting up this podcast. It's just nice to not have to do all that stuff yourself, because I've
Sure.
played that role before in this band and in other bands, and so much stuff gets dropped, or you're just doing stuff that you're bad at, you know, and you
Yeah,
can't
that
be good
someone
at
else would
all.
be able to do much more efficiently.
Yeah, so it's tough, but I'm extremely grateful for everybody who helps us keep up with the things we need to do.
And in terms of the kind of like the practical side of what's feasible and what you want to do you sort of have in mind between you how active you want to be touring in the coming months?
Yeah, ultimately, we're a bit pinned right now where we've applied for American visas. We were invited to perform at a festival called Northwest Terror Fest out of Seattle, which unfortunately, the American visas have been delayed. We don't know when they're going to come in. We have withdrawn from Terror Fest and one associated show because of that. We are currently based on what we have been told, we should receive our visas for the fall. We'll hopefully make something happen in that period. But ultimately, we don't know. There's a lot of uncertainty. And it's frustrating, right? Visas, like I could check my email right now and they could be there, or they might never show up. We might end up waiting till October for them to tell us that our visa's been declined because of some error in paperwork or something. You never know, and it's frustrating working under uncertainty. It's frustrating. It's difficult, doing things like booking with venues, booking with other bands when you're like, I don't want to inflict harm on any of these people if stuff gets messy due to forces out of our control. So ultimately, I would love to hit the road a couple times this year. Would definitely love to be able to play live for audiences further abroad. Long, medium-term goal, like I think I mentioned earlier, would love to get to Europe. I think we play a more European influenced style of metal. I think most of our biggest influences are, whether they're from England or they're from Sweden or Finland, very much of that continent. So would love to do that, but we'll see what happens. Step one is we've got 2 very local shows, Vancouver, Victoria. We'll be celebrating the album at, and I'm really looking forward to that.
No, that's cool. And, from a practical point of view, like I talked to various North American bands, and I definitely get a sense that one of the advantages, if you do get over to Europe, is that when it comes to booking shows and getting a tour going, everything is relatively so much closer together than it is when you're in North America.
Oh, and especially depends where you are in North America. Like we did a fly out tour where we went to Toronto when we did sort of that East Coast US. Even that's not too bad. But where we are in Western Canada is tough. And especially if you don't have visas and you can't touch the United States. Touring Canada, you're talking, you can drive for 10 to 12 hours to go from a city that has 200,000 people to a city that has 300,000 people. Like, it's just painful. And yeah, I look at maps of Europe and I see tour routes and I'm like, it is incredible on multiple levels, because I think both you have shorter drives, but also that the logistical challenges I was talking about lining up your dates are much simpler when you have a lot of cities you could hit.
Yep.
Or if you're like, actually, there's 5 or 6 cities that are all in a day's drive of each other, you can fit them in so many different places. Where it's like, if you want to play in Edmonton, then you want to play in Saskatoon, then you want to play in Winnipeg, there is one order you could play those cities in. Like, unless you want to drive 30 hours in one day, you have to play those cities in a specific order.
No, that makes a lot of sense.
If you can't book the venues in that order, it's like, well, there's nothing you can do. You can't tour.
No, it's a very good point. Thinking about the album then, so I've seen that you've got like a purple vinyl edition of the album. What are the different editions that people can get it on?
I think there's 5 different vinyl variants in different colors. 4 of them are put through $20 bin, including one that's just a classic black vinyl for those of you who are old school and traditional. And then there's one additional pressing done by Decibel Magazine, which is super cool. Super grateful for that. They've been around for a long time, and their support of us and our album is very exciting. Very appreciate it. And then there's the cassette tape. It's being put out through $20 bin as well as the CD. And then, of course, all of your standard and non-standard streaming services.
Yeah. And also digital downloads from Bandcamp if people like to have the digital music but actually want to support the bands. No,
that is a classic, beloved format and something I'm always grateful for.
Yeah. I've got a lot of love for Bandcamp.
Yeah, it's a very full service, and like you say, it's that blend of digital convenience, but actual, like, you are actually purchasing the music, and you're spending a very different amount of money to put a very different amount of support into the art you love. So I appreciate everybody who, like, I don't have an extensive Bandcamp collection. I mostly just buy albums to support my friends, but I'm grateful for everybody who really walks the walk on that one.
Yeah, and also as well, because a lot of the time, I mean, I can't remember specifically what you've got with the album, with your past album on Bandcamp, but a lot of the time with music on Bandcamp, it's pretty affordable, or people can pay whatever they want. So when a lot of people are just streaming the music on Spotify, it's like it doesn't really take a lot to buy something on Bandcamp.
Yeah, I mean, it is. It is. I think it is affordable, and it isn't because a lot of people, certainly in a streaming world, like they love to listen to a lot of music, or they'll listen to an album once or twice, listen to half of it, and move on to something else. And I do think, like, even if you're paying $5 for an album, $7 for an album, I think Bandcamp's now just said they're upping their standard album costs a little bit. But even like a relatively small amount of money like that, if you're listening to, 10 new albums a month, 20 new albums a month, that's money. And
Mm,
part of that is, and again, circling back around to being something a bit cooler, is that it does make that music a little bit more deliberate, a little bit more
yes.
conscious.
Yeah.
You're not just treating it as something disposable, throwaway. You give a quick spin to half the album and then you move on. I think if you've purchased something, even for a small amount of money, I think it means a bit more.
Yes. I completely agree. I have that feeling too. Yeah. You kind of feel you've invested something in it. And
Yeah,
so, yeah, I feel like you're more likely to go, okay, I'm listening to this now, rather than like you say, you listen to a bit and go, something else, something else, something else.
of course. Yeah, I'm a big fan of Bandcamp.
Yeah. And so thinking about people following what the band's doing in general, are you, is Instagram generally the best place for people to go to? Where are you active?
Basically, our main social media is Instagram and Facebook. I would say Instagram tends to be our main one, but it's also like different things shared differently on different platforms. Like, it's a lot easier to share links and videos on Facebook, whereas
Mm,
Instagram tends to be more like it wants curated boutique content. It's harder to be like, oh, here's a link to YouTube or whatever. But
yeah,
we do tend to get more traction on Instagram. So we oftentimes prioritize it as a platform, but most of our posts are cross-posted across both mediums. But aside from that, like honestly, you don't necessarily want to be too much of an old man, yelling at clouds, but we're not huge social media fans. Like it's kind of fun. Like we're a very aesthetic band. It's enjoyable to get to curate, a certain aesthetic
yeah,
on your social media, but that can get really annoying when you're like under pressure to constantly feed content to the algorithm or be like, oh,
I feel it. Yeah.
you have to play this game in order for your fans to know about your next show. And ultimately, it is what it is. And I'm grateful for it. It allows us to connect with people around the world. And, it's not like in a pre social media time, all of our fans would magically learn about our upcoming shows. But it's not something we enjoy doing.
Mm,
So it's oftentimes something that's treated a bit more begrudgingly,
yeah.
but it's still cool and it's still wonderful, to see, like I said, to get to connect with people around the world, and you'll see somebody commenting on your thing, like, this is going to be my album of the year, and you're like, oh, this is somebody who lives in like Poland or something. And you're like, that's really cool.
Yeah, that is
You know,
really
it's
cool.
it's wonderful that the internet and social media has allowed us to spread our art around the world. Like we're grateful for that. But
And
it's
who,
ups and
I completely understand. And so who tends to be the one, or who are the, like, do you and Soren share doing social
It's
media stuff?
Soren and I and everyone else to a certain extent. Honestly, it's one of those obligations of just like
Whose turn is it this time?
we all try to make someone else do it. Nobody really wants to. Is how I would describe it. It's not like something like I tend to get quite excited about interviews. I really enjoy getting to sit down and have a more in-depth discussion about our art. So that's something I'm always like, if I can make it work, I want to be there.
Yeah.
That social media is much more like, especially like posting on social media. Like I enjoy like commenting with fans or like messaging. That's very cool. That little bit more like it's less performative, more genuine. You don't have to think as much about like how everything's going to be perceived or how it's going to perform with the algorithm. But the
Yeah.
actual crafting of posts is very much I did it last time. Could someone else do this?
Yeah. I get it. Yeah. I mean, like, I love doing interviews. Like, this is kind of my, I'd write reviews as well, but I enjoy doing interviews more. And, yeah, I kind of recognize, doing posts and promoting it is a part of it and it can be helpful. But then also as well, a lot of the time it's just, I'd just rather do the interviews and put them out there. And if I can incrementally get more people aware of them, then that's great. But it's kind of, you never really know how much time is worth putting into social media posting. That's the thing as well. You can end up dedicating a lot of time and you only get like what, 1%, 2% more return out of it.
Yeah, you can. You can get yourself in a space of like, okay, you get a certain amount of growth, but only because you're posting regularly in a certain way. Or you can end up in this weird trap of like, okay, this kind of content performed well. Do we want to do more of it? Or are people getting tired of that? Or just, and so much of it's out of your control. But it's true
Yeah.
of like or anything you're doing. But it is ultimately, I think a lot of the stuff we create, whether it's, interviews or making a podcast or making an album, I think first and foremost, you want to do it for yourself and because you enjoy it, and it's
Yeah.
it's nice to make it available to people, and if they want to experience it they can. But I do think it can be a little maddening chasing the number go up excitement. As much as that's addictive in its own way, it's not a long-term path to artistic fulfillment.
I agree. And on that note, thank you so much for your time. It was great to talk to
Thanks
you.
for having me.
Great to talk about your music. And yeah, I wish you well with the visas.
Well,
And
thank you.
hopefully, somewhere down the line, I'll get a chance to see you guys play in Europe.
Yeah, I would absolutely love to make it out to Scotland, so we'll see what happens.
Nice. I'll be on the lookout. Thanks a lot.
Well, thank you.